Haven't seen the tweet. Okay, but Dave, so I admit, when I was invited to do this interview with you, people were like, oh, you were his editor, it'll be great. But honestly, it's like, okay, so if I was your editor, I was kind of like the midwife of your book baby. And first of all, no one wants to know what it looks like in the birthing room. And, by now, the book has obviously been out in the world for a couple of weeks. So many people are reading it, talking about it, talking with you about it, and it's starting to take starting to take on a life of its own. So let's start there. What has surprised you about your reactions to how the book is being received?
It's a strange sensation it would be one thing if it was a cookbook or a book of fiction. I think some things would be similar, but having never written a memoir, but sometimes opening a restaurant and sometimes that feels like a memoir, you never want to get trashed. I think that's the hardest thing. And the criticism has mostly been very, very positive, but at the end of the day, still, even at a restaurant, you want to make sure that everyone's happy. So ultimately, and obviously this makes sense if you read the book or know me, I can't really focus on anything that is positive, and most of it has been overwhelmingly positive. I just mostly remember the handful of negative things or comments.
Okay, but even at those, like, are there some that, like, okay, there's gonna be some obvious ones, right? Like, there people are gonna come at you just for being a chef. They're gonna come at you for, you talk a lot in the book about, in some ways, being a really difficult person to work with. You talk a lot in the book about working on your own, certainly on your own mental health, but part of that too is working on your own anger. And, I think people, I'm sure, come at you for that, like, oh, why would you behave this way? But what are some critiques that, if these are things you're dwelling on, like, are there ones that stick with you in a way that makes you really rethink something?
I mean, I read one, and it was, just to parse it out, it was like, to paraphrase, well, it was all his perspective. I wish there were more perspectives. And I was like, wait, what the fuck does that mean? Of course it's my perspective, and I'm trying my best to recall it from different perspectives to give it a holistic point of view, but I don't know. It's just, at the end of the day, you can't make everyone happy, and that's it. And I am grateful for the people that have read it. I'm grateful for the response. I think, I know, just talking to you about it, we sort of identified 3 buckets, even though they weren't something that we sought out to do. But after we all read it, I don't know how many times, we would address the culinary industry, identity, Asian American identity, and mental illness. And those seem to be resonating. Particularly mental illness seems to be resonating with most of the readers, and that's all very, very positive. So I don't know. At the end of the day, too, I'm having a hard time registering that people are still reading it, or it's hard. Of course, do I want it to sell well? Of course, but I have a disconnect in terms of accepting that it's still out there in the world, right?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's very weird. It's a very weird feeling.
Okay, I want to get to this. So you said a lot of people are responding to, the very frank conversation about mental health and mental illness in this. And, everything I've seen has been mostly positive. There's still this very toxic idea in the world of, oh, you shouldn't talk about it. Like a couple of weeks ago, like Dak Prescott, quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, talked about how he went into a deep depression when his brother passed away. And I forget who, but some prominent sports
Skip Bayless.
Skip Bayless came out and said, oh, you shouldn't do that as the leader of your team. It makes you look not like the leader. And how do you...
I think I put on Twitter, fuck you, Skip Bayless. Oh, and people may not realize this. Skip Bayless of Fox Sports is the brother of Rick Bayless of Frontera Grill. Yeah. that to me is the problem. Is you're not supposed to talk about certain things or show vulnerability. And I think what Dak did, if you're not aware, Dak Prescott, the starting quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, said over the past year, he was having, suicidal tendencies, and he was very depressed, and his brother had committed suicide, and it was a very honest assessment of what happened. And some people in the media criticized him for being transparent, and I thought actually that was an incredibly brave thing.
Yeah,
and that was strength, not weakness.
right.
And we just have to change that perception.
But it's one thing to do that even in a public way, right? Because I think there is a recognition of, like, not that it's easy by any stretch of imagination. I imagine it has to be really incredibly hard, and therein lies the bravery. But I want to ask you, you've been known for a long time. Like, I've even sort of commented on my experience of working with you. Like, Dave Chang is honestly probably one of the most written about chefs in American history. I mean, and you have been known as being outspoken. You've been known as someone who is always frank with your opinions. But I know that when you were writing this book, you wanted to be profoundly transparent, not just in a bravado way, but in a deep way. And I remember your co-writer Gabe Ula telling me that you had in fact given him like access to, like, I don't know exactly what it was, but like your private journals, or maybe like notes from your therapy sessions, or
Yeah, I gave him everything. I gave him access to my emails. I said, go to town. I got nothing to hide.
How did you become so unguarded?
I think it's a combination. It's a confluence of many things. I was not this way. Clearly, I was not this way before I opened Momofuku, and many things about me were not this way prior to 2004. I was not necessarily a wallflower, but I wasn't someone that was going to be noticed in the ways that I am. I think I was a late bloomer in a lot of ways, but sharing things, particularly my emotions and feelings, and communicating that in any way just was off the table. That never happened. And opening up Momofuku was therapy in many ways, and still is, but it forced me to be someone that I was not. And that turned into good things and bad things. I tie that together with me beginning to see my psychiatrist. And those early sessions, I would never talk about anything. And I think early on, especially if you read like some of the first press that we were lucky to get, I remember Robin interviewing us, and I refused to let them print my name. I didn't want them to print my name because I didn't want to embarrass the people I worked for. And I didn't want that. And all of it happened sort of accidentally. And a lot of it also was this either or proposition to me. Everything is an either or proposition of, who cares if you do this, as long as you don't hurt anyone or yourself, it doesn't matter, right? Like, death is the worst case scenario, and everything above that is tolerable, right? Who cares about what you're going to do? People don't remember you. Or any of your accomplishments. Like, nobody remembers that. So what are you trying to hide? And this is, again, before the real popularity of social media. Actually, there was no social media then. Right. So that was just a different time. And I think that the catalyst to all of that change really was me being in an open kitchen. I was telling Adam Grant this, the psychologist, I became transparent in how I lived my life because it was easier. In the same vein that, I wear a lot of the same outfits. I'll buy multiples of the same thing, just because I don't want to think about it. Sure. So me just being honest was easier to not keep track of lies, I just was so busy with work that I didn't have time to not tell the truth. And a lot of that was an embodiment of how we work. There was no place to hide. and that again turned into good and bad things at the restaurant. But that first noodle bar, which turned into Co. and was 600 square feet, 27 seats, and you were sitting at my counter, you knew everything about me. There was, and that just sort of carried over how I did everything until now. And with therapy and executive coaching and behavioral and cognitive therapy and all these things, and just getting a little bit older, the things that I used to be embarrassed about, I'm like, who fucking cares? I mean, who cares ultimately? So that's why I was like, hey, let's just go. I mean, let's just be as honest. I mean, it wasn't have to be, let's be honest as possible. That's just how I've always tried to be, you know?
Yeah. It's actually incredible hearing you say all this, because I remember a story that was in the book that I think we cut down and maybe almost cut out, but then like reinserted. I think it's literally just a footnote now, but it was a story about how early in your career, after having opened Momofuku and you were getting attention, like Food and Wine came to film a video with you, and you wrote that you were in such a headspace that you literally could not speak. Like they were trying to film this video, and like you literally could not like make words come out of your mouth.
Yeah, I wasn't. Here's another thing. I never had the money. If I had the money, we would have had a closed kitchen. We would have had a different space. If I had the money, we probably would have hired PR. Momofuku has never hired PR. It was all by like, I don't fucking know how to talk to journalists. Well, this is what's happening. That's how it all started.
It was
just
strategy.
There's no strategy, right? Growing organically means not having any fucking idea what you're doing, just trying to make it work. And early on, working that hard, just grinding yourself to exhaustion, how am I going to answer what's your death Romeo? Like, I hear a stupid question like that, I'm going to be like, how do I answer it? That's only when I have to struggle to come up with something that is, I won't say politically correct, but like, you know,
socially acceptable.
I struggle with that because I have to come up with bullshit, you know? So I think that Food and Wine or whatever those were those kinds of questions. What's your desert island? Like, what are the top 5 ingredients you have to bring on a desert island? I'm like, fucking no. Like, I don't know how to answer that. So I'm going to struggle to answer that. Like, I just can't come up with bullshit. So, you know, those early days were hard because it was clear that I needed help. Mm-hmm. And when you think about it, a lot of these people that were grilling me, they were trying to take something. But I think it was like, hey, man, like, this is really hard. This job is incredibly stressful. And I'm having a hard time. And it's not just me. It's just about every chef, restaurant owner. It has a hard time. Like, it doesn't come naturally to them. It's not because they're not loquacious or affable. There's a shit ton of stress on their plate, right? There is all kinds of things that are going wrong. So again, I always try to tell people that moment in time when you're at a supermarket and you see parents sort of freaking out on their kids, right? It's at some point you sort of lose your patience. We don't have to talk about what happens after the point, but at the end of the day, if you went to that parent who was very like calm with their 3 or 4 kids and at some point they just sort of snap and they're just running like crazy. If you ask that parent like an interview, it's like, hey, you know, can you give me a recipe for, you know, roast chicken? What are they gonna fucking say? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? You know what I mean? It's just,
my kid is climbing the shelf of the store right now.
Yeah, and that's sort of what it's like for a lot of restaurant owners. Wait, all of a sudden, this world of restaurants that doesn't fit in any other part of the culture, now I have to like fit and be prim and proper, and that's hard. And if people, I really hope, and you know, we just did a podcast with Corey Lee about it, and he really nailed it on the head. So much of the future should be other people not in the restaurant industry empathizing with the stress and difficulty of people that are running these businesses. And for me, that was everything, staying alive. So if I had a hard time answering questions, it was because that's just the reality. It was fucking hard.
Yeah. But it's interesting because, like, you know, you mentioned that was in 2004. That was Noodle Bar's first year. And in the time since, though, it's become essentially part of the job description, right? Of a chef owner, to be able to talk to the media, right? I mean, you're talking about an industry that for generations was about being behind a closed door, metaphoric and literal. And as that role, the role of the chef, became something that had the cultural cachet in our culture, all of a sudden we started to treat it in the way we treat every other role of cultural cachet, which is to say a celebrity, right? So like, oh, there are people who want to come get to know you. They want to like print stuff about you, make you relatable to their readers. They want this, they want that. And it became just part of the deal. And I think you also started to see restaurants who understood that now, like, the world of the restaurant and the world of media were like intertwined and sort of like, you know, growing into and around each other. Like, how many restaurants have you seen in the last 10 years or 15 years ago? This was not a thing, but like in the last 10 years or 7 years, 8 years, whatever, restaurants that like open with like such a specific story, like a literal story. Oh, this is the food of, if, you know, the journey my grandmother took to meet my grandfather. So like, this is my interpretation of Korean Slovakian cuisine.
Yeah,
And
everything became formulaic, both from the media's end and from the culinary end, that if you wanted it to be accepted, it had to, it's a lot like an Oscar film, you know? You had to like check certain boxes for it to be accepted. And, you know, hopefully that stops, you know, and chefs need to, most of that responsibility is on chefs, for sure, to change the conversation. And I hope that you don't have to be media trained. And that's ultimately, well, not when I say media trained, it sucks. So I'm going to give this chef as an example because he was one of my mentors, Jonathan Beno. Mm-hmm. Jonathan Beno is one of the greatest chefs America's ever produced, both as a technician and as just a great mind about cooking. Someone that obviously helped get Thomas Keller 3 Michelin stars and 4 stars, and he's done all kinds of things. He has spent his life trying to be a chef in the kitchen.
Sure.
And he maybe isn't as well known because he's not, you know, he doesn't like talking to the cameras.
Yeah.
I don't know why that should be punished. In fact, I think that should be celebrated. Mm-hmm. But that's hard to market. And right. There's so many chefs like Jonathan Beno, and I hope that we can find new ways to celebrate them.
Yeah. But it's funny, right? Because at the same time, like, I totally understand that, and I understand, and that is actually, you know, that isn't that's almost like, there's no like cultural icon that we have that we look up to and say like, oh, Beno fits the model of this model that we know we respect, right? Like, and this is sort of cliche, but like, oh, in Japanese cuisine or culture, there's the shukunin, right? Who's like the craftsperson who dedicates themselves, and all they do is the one thing, and they're about like trying to like just get incrementally better at literally, you know, cutting noodles by hand. That's what they do over and over. But that's a respected idea. And for us, like, we have a young dining culture. Like I said, like, the way we understand chefs and dining culture is like, fits into the sort of mental model of how we understand celebrity, right? So we actually want to know the person. We want to hear their stories. We want to know that they're better than us, but the same as us, right? So yeah, I don't think we like have a cultural mechanism to understand someone like a Beno, who just wants to be a technician and a leader in this specific way.
Yeah, Francis, it's crazy. You know, if anything, to reflect on some of the what's happened in the book, or, you know, the past 20 years, which is crazy just to even say that word, 20 years. But so much of the book sort of encapsulates what were the old ways into where we are now. And I've certainly benefited more than most people or anyone from this dynamic change. So I'm, again, grateful for it, and I can also hate myself for it.
Most people say, like, hate the game, not the player. But no, I hate myself for this. Well, actually, this is a great question. Because you came up in this, as a cook, you came up in this like old school French style brigade system. It's a system that is about militancy. It's a stereotypical way that we understand how chefs work, right? It's about militancy.
Francis, you worked in that system too.
Yeah. And like you, I both like think it's totally fucked up, but also feel like maybe because it's like Stockholm Syndrome, I also like love it. And I know you're very public about how much you respect the great chefs of a generation or two ago who were very old school. Like, maybe they could smile in front of the camera and tell you a beautiful story about the cuisine and how they were influenced by, like, maman or whatever. But like, back in the kitchen, they were throwing knives at their cooks or whatever. But so you came up that way as a cook, but as a chef,
I got the tail end of that era.
Right.
Right.
But
so
like,
did you, right? No one will know what that was like. That was I thought it was bad until I went to Japan. That was crazy shit. But yeah, I mean,
but there was also this idea.
But that was another interesting. It's not just we were talking about this on the podcast too. It's not just the French brigade system. There is a hierarchy in just about not every food culture, but certainly in China, certainly in Japan, where it's not based on the military system of France, it's based on like their military systems. It's weird that there's something about cooking in professional kitchens that I hope it's not there. I want to know what's the reasoning for some kind of military system, because the question that I should be asking, or I am asking to many of my peers and to someone like you as well, is we know we need to get rid of it. We know we need to update it, but that's not the question we need to be asking. It's like, how the fuck do you do it?
Sure.
That's so hard. And there's a lot of nostalgia. Yes, I think you are right. It is Stockholm Syndrome. I don't get along. I didn't get along with most of my people at Cafe Balloon, but if you work there at that era, like, you are family forever. You're bound by trauma. Whether you stayed there a month or 5 years, you're like, hey, I know we went through something together.
Yeah, we tasted the fire together.
Yeah.
We fought the dragon. But okay, let's bring it back to your early days then as your own chef operator, right? And you had your own house you were running in the early Momofuku days. You write about some of the people you worked with, some of the chefs who came through there with so much affection and gratitude in the book. But like, you also write about how you basically created an insane working environment for them.
Yeah.
So when you think about those people, when you I know you keep in touch with a number of them, when you talk to them, do you ever wonder, like, would we have had the success we did if we ran things differently than we did?
The most emotional moment I had thinking about this was with Joaquin Baca, who we were talking about it. And he was said, number one, he's like, I'm really proud of you, Dave. This is a great story. I'm proud to be part of it. And there was a lot of, it's funny. The older we get, I never thought we'd be this emotional as we get older with each other. And I love him very much, and vice versa.
And he was the chef that worked with you when you were.
Yeah, he was the only person that he was the only person that believed in me. No one else wanted to work with me at all. And the funny thing is, he's like, were we really that obnoxious? Were we that fucking stupid? And I said, yeah, we were that fucking stupid. And you can look back on that now and shake your head at yourself. And also, I think you can shake your head at yourself because you're no longer that person. And that's a good thing. It would be a whole nother story if Kino said he couldn't even recognize that because we had not changed. And I think that's I mean, that's both a sad thing and a beautiful thing, is to grow as a person. And you can't connect the dots till after the fact. And we created an environment that was, I think those people that were the early days, I hope that as hard as it was, and I know not everyone can share that feeling, but I know when I talk to Kino, it's like, man, that was the best time. That was the highlight of our careers. But if I had to think about that, especially when we went over some of those old emails, that was hell on earth. There was nothing at all fun about any of it. And nostalgia is a weird thing. Nostalgia is a very weird thing, to think fondly about something when, if you have to really go back in that time period, it was fucking hard. Every day thinking it's all going to end. I mean, I still feel that way, but.
Yeah. I mean, there's like, pick your cliche of those ideas, right? Like the brightest lights shine in the darkest moments, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
There's that great book, Paradise Built in Hell. That's exactly, it's about people like coming together in traumatic catastrophes, right? But now as I use we loosely, but as we as a culture, certainly you directly as an owner operator, as a business person, recognize a need to change, a need to not have those kinds of environments. I don't doubt your sincerity at all, but I'm just curious, like, do you feel I don't know. Would you trade away that feeling? Would you trade away that nostalgia? If you could like snap your fingers and like, okay, 20 years ago, we knew how to run kitchens in a humane way.
Yeah, of course. I mean, think about this all the time. You cannot change the past, but you can, the only folly would be to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And the past doesn't mean it's not living still, right? And there's so many moments where you're like, you should have questioned it, but you did it. Or you're like, is there a better way? But of course there is. And that's not just in culture, that could be even like a technique. Like I'll never forget, like when I worked for in a kitchen, they're like, no, if it's not cooked if it's not cooked with fire, that's not cooking. And change in this kind of kitchen environment. When I say change in this environment, it is the super ambitious trying to get 2-3 Michelin star restaurants. It's a specific kind of world. Much like F1 racing or NASCAR or something like that. The stakes are high, and that it inevitably leads that bro militant culture, and it is allergic to change to the point where, again, we still don't use the metric system. We still use the imperial system, which is incredibly fucking stupid. Okay? Like,
don't touch
that
my
literally
ounces. I love my ounces.
Yeah, you let people love their ounces, but it just shows you, like, even though that's a minute thing, and that has nothing to do with it's a little bit with the restaurant industry, but more as a culture, people have a harder time changing in this profession. Change does not happen. People want to encourage the status quo, not shake it. That's what my belief is. I think in general, people want to encourage the status quo in the restaurant industry.
It's ironic, right? Because it is an industry where, like, culturally we also think of chefs as auteurs, right? And we're always talking about like, oh, like the creativity of this chef. I know there's an age-old debate. We don't have to get into it now because it's incredibly boring. But like, oh, is cooking art or is it craft? But like, even the fact that is a cliche conversation, and that we we constantly talk about how creative the food is here. Like that's the number one thing people want to talk about. Like, oh, my food is very creative. Oh, their food is very creative. It's like, oh, their food is well seasoned. Is their food properly cooked? But their food is creative, right? Like that's the first. That is like the prime directive of how we think about chefs. And to hear you describe the fact that, like, oh, within how they work, they're extremely uncreative. They're extremely conservative.
Francis, I will tell you, one of the reasons we're in this mess as a restaurant industry, I mean, yes, because of fucking Trump and all that shit and the government being terrible, is we didn't embrace change early enough. We got lazy. I'm not gonna say I don't think we did. We were always trying shit out. We were always trying to see what's around the corner. Is there a better way to do what we're doing? More often than not, we fail, but that's like built in the DNA of who I am and certainly our company. But I think a lot of my frustration now that I've had some months to think about it is we missed a lot of beautiful opportunities to at least be prepared, better prepared for worst case scenarios.
Like what?
Like I say, like we started that delivery company too. I believe in it so much, Maple and Ondo, and everyone laughed at us. What are you doing, Dave? That's not cooking. That's not a restaurant. That's so fucking stupid. And I said, listen, guys, fixed costs are getting more expensive. It's going to be more difficult with labor, all of these things. I don't want to get rid of labor. I don't want to get rid of fixed costs. I don't want to get out of the restaurant business. But we're headed for an iceberg here, and we need to do something about it. So let's try new things out. And we try something new, and everyone's like, that's fucking stupid. And if we had embraced that earlier, I'm not saying it had to be me, but if I knew this early on, I'm not trying to say it's about me, I think other people too, the delivery model was going to be a problem because of the 30% top line. And we needed to gain control of that from the restaurant, independent restaurant perspective. That was a problem 6 years ago. We identified it. We need to do something about that. We cannot become indentured servants to the delivery logistics business. We need to start to do that full stack ourselves. And everyone's like, you're fucking stupid. Well, guess what people are trying to do now? What we did 6 years ago. And it's not, again, it doesn't have to be us, but it was simply use that, not just as an example of who gives a shit it was delivery. It could be serving popcorn. Who gives a shit, right? It could be no tipping, right? Think about the no tipping and the fucking allergic reaction everybody has with it. I guarantee you now, everyone's like, yeah, you know what? We should get rid of tipping. I mean, you're still going to have pushback, but like, we need to be better prepared for the future. And again, like I know I'm going off topic a little bit, but it's more of a microcosm of the allergic reaction we get as an independent restaurant group to new things, to new ideas. And I think we perpetuate the status quo, and that's fucking stupid.
Let me ask you something that actually you touch on only briefly in the book, but I'm thinking about a lot. It's like just like pinging in my head. What you're talking about is you trying to be someone who exists in your community of you know, in your community, meaning like the world of your business, who really is invested in questioning what seem like invisible ground rules, or maybe in some cases explicit ground rules, explicit realities, and just being like, why that? Why accept that? Why accept that? And in your book, you write about growing up in an extremely religious.
Francis, you want to know why? Guess who made all these fucking rules? Some old fucking white dude. Some old rich white dude that didn't want anyone else to have any other opinions. And that sounds crazy, but it's a fact, right? And we still are living through that, of challenging these assumptions. Simply, like, there's so many ways you could cut this. Like, one of the easiest things to understand is, hey, ethnic food has to be cheap. Who the fuck said that?
Right.
That's some racist shit, man. And that's about control, and I'm not going to have that.
Right. Well, okay, here's the thing. I mean, yeah, I mean, there's It's funny, and if people were like, well, what's he mean? Like, no one made rules for the restaurant. Like, not like some guy sat there and made rules for the restaurant industry, except like, oh, there's like, oh, if you look at the history of tipping, it's actually related to the idea that when they were still, because restaurants were an invention, right? Like restaurants didn't like always appear in society. They were an invention. Like we decided as a culture, as a society, like, oh, we want to have a place where people can buy food, and you would sit down and we would serve it to you, and you would then like tip the server because the owner wasn't going to pay the server. And that actually comes right out of enslavement. Like that was actually a model brought over from having enslaved servers, and you didn't want to pay them. Like that was actually where
Yeah.
that
Francis,
how
that model,
here.
the restaurant industry is built on this model of not just tipping, of control of who gets access and who doesn't. Who gets to decide what is best and who gets to decide what is a failure.
Right.
You know, and I'm just, these are cultural truths that are stupid, right? This is why I always get angry whenever I think about kimchi being popular now, right? Because it certainly wasn't before. So what's changed? Is kimchi all of a sudden magically better? Have we evolved in 35 years to have palates more attuned to kimchi? Or was it just cultural ignorance?
But tell me this. If kimchi is popular now, isn't it at least, even if it's like 0.01%, because David Chang is a chef I've heard of, and are you saying, like, isn't that what you wanted?
Explain. Sorry, I missed that.
I mean, the fact that, I remember the early menus at Noodle Bar. You've always had pickles, preserves, and often these were some form of kimchi. If you're mad that kimchi is popular now, and I get it.
No, I'm not mad. I'm not mad at kimchi's popular at all. And contrary to people saying, oh, white people can't make kimchi, no, that's not my statement. I'm happy to talk about that at a later date if need be. I'm mad that the reason it wasn't popular before was it because of ignorance. Mm-hmm. I'm not mad because it's popular now. I'm excited that it's popular. What makes me mad is the fact that it was even unpopular to begin with. And if you can extrapolate that example of kimchi, how many other fucking foods, how many other parts of different cultures, not even talking about food, aren't accepted because some stupid person had a dumb opinion that was just based on ignorance?
Yeah, like how many kids went to school and got beat up for their stinky lunch, right? And
yeah. But again, it's like food just is one vehicle to talk about other parts of culture, you know?
Sure.
It's the same thing. Like director Bong wins the Parasite. People are like, well, fucking Korean film can't be good enough to win an Oscar. Like, who the fuck said that? I bet you I know there are tons of films made from Korean directors that were maybe better than Parasite. Now we're saying it's good. Like, this is the conversation that food can have, and we should be having, about challenging assumptions of what is worthy and what is not.
Yeah. Since we have a few minutes before we have to go to questions, and we're on this topic, can you tell us a story? David, story time. Can you tell us about your chicken sandwich?
Oh man, fuku. I mean, I wanted to make a Chick-fil-A killer because, and I didn't want to do it that was based on the American South. I want to do that was based on something that was Asian American. We can talk more about fuku. There's so much to talk about, the origins of it, how it was supposed to be an online restaurant only, and all this other shit that we cut out of the book because it could have been 300 pages just about fuku. I think the most important thing to note was that I wanted to make the wrappers. We bought, I think, like, I don't know how many thousands. It seemed like 80,000 was the minimum order. You get the generic wrapper that says delicious, right? When you go to a stadium or something like that. And again, when I came up with fuku, I was, in retrospect, in a fucking crazy manic state. right? For me, when I'm in a manic high, every idea is so juicy that needs to be plucked, and every idea seems like a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, let's just drop the L and replace it with the R. And the whole goal was to show that I thought that this was what's going to happen. I thought people were going to say, "Oh, that's hilarious. That's so funny." And the original Fuku location was homage to basically every Asian thing that was seen as bad, or even Asian bad guys, right? In films. And I wanted to like make a statement being like, hey, Asian American identity and culture is thought so little that people are going to say something racist and they don't even know it, and they're probably going to laugh. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, that's what happened. Right. And no one fucking cared, and it made me incredibly angry.
Right.
I wanted to bring attention to something, and the problem was attention was never brought to the subject.
Right. Like people realized they were laughing at you, and they were perfectly comfortable doing it.
And that was how insidious it was. And that's when I was like, oh, this is actually going to be a detriment to the cause, not help raise awareness to it. Yeah.
Oh God.
I mean, much of Momofuku has been an art project, now that I think about it, right? That was like a real art project, which is why some of my investors are like, you are the fucking shittiest business person.
And on that note, let's go to some audience questions. Dave Chang, pull quote, "You are the shittiest business person I've ever had." All right, I want to ask one. You sort of alluded to this already through much of this conversation, but here's a nice way of putting perspective on it. This is a question from Anthony Reyes. "Thank you for doing this, Dave. Do you think if you pursued another career field or passion, that you would have realized and confronted the same emotional challenges you discussed in the book?"
You know, this is a conversation, Anthony, a question I have asked myself with my psychiatrist a lot. And I think the answer is no. I don't think I needed to be put in a situation that was going to put me to my breaking point. And that would be the answer to your question. I don't think I would have had a lot of these understandings of myself and growth or whatever if I didn't take myself to total, like the lowest points. And so with my psychiatrist, we've talked about what would be some of those jobs that would take me to an incredibly low point and to a breaking point. And those would be the jobs that would have a similar result. And you know, they've ranged from anywhere from working on an oil rig to working in a coal mine to shit like that. But as a whole, I don't think I would have ever had any of this happen if I didn't work in restaurants. And I'll be honest, a lot of times I thought about maybe that would be a good thing if I just was the more passive Dave Chang and lived a much more quiet, anonymous existence. And I'll be honest, sometimes I still, you know, ponder what that would be like, and the grass is always greener.
Let me ask another one. This is from Kemba. I'm sorry if I pronounce your name wrong, but Kemba Metropolis. "I want to share your memoir with my high school students, especially how you reflected on your past and worked through so much. What would you really want someone to take away from your memoir and maybe use as a springboard as they grow into adulthood?"
Kemba, thanks for that. And I see.
No pressure, Dave.
You know, sometimes I have this conversation with someone like cooks when they first start working for us over the years, but particularly even later. And in some ways, this book is, I wouldn't say a testament, but evidence that you certainly need a lot of luck. But if you have, you know, near below average skill sets across the board, you'll find a way. And I do believe that. I think that's why I dedicate this to the underdogs.
Mm.
So I think it's Kemba, it's two-pronged answer to your question. One is, if you're going to read this for your students, or your students are going to read this, I think at the end of the day, you're going to come across some kind of obstacle in your life. And you have two choices. It's a kind of obstacle that's going to be debilitating, and it's going to rack you with indecision and anxiety and dread. And it's completely natural and I wouldn't say easy to use that failure. And more than likely, this obstacle you will fail at trying to solve, and you can use that as a completely understanding way, as an excuse, right, as to why things don't work out well. And I think that's the hardest part, is to explain to people that that's okay. And I think in this culture, we try to celebrate the people that don't do that and try to use that as a springboard. I think both of those things, I really wrestle with that. And I think if I was a student reading this, just to know that, you know, you're not going to come up with an answer for that first failure or that first obstacle. More than likely, you're going to hit another one, and then another one, and then another failure, and then another failure. The success is going to be continuing to fail. Right? Don't stop failing. Don't make the same kind of mistake, right? That's the hardest part. That's a leap of faith. And that's also why I think it's a little bit dangerous advice, is regardless of the odds stacked against you, you need to just sort of grind it out. And again, we could talk, you know, a whole sort of 17 plus hours about this subject, but that's what I think is, at the end of the day, the pain of failure causes people to sort of become gun shy. And I think that's the opposite of what you need to do. And I think the other thing I would add is, I think, you know, if I was a student today, I would still believe that most of the textbooks and most of the things in culture are about getting you to the mountaintop, right? And teaching you one version of what success is, whether it's personally, romantically, or business. And I think you should question that. You know, is that success what I actually want? And, you know, we talk a lot about it in the book too. I think no one ever talks about getting down from the fucking mountain. And because that just doesn't sell books, that doesn't grab headlines. But even in mountain climbing, that's where most accidents happen. Not the ascent, it's the descent.
Coming back down, yeah.
And I think you need to be really aware of that. And that's why we changed that line from "save something for the swim back." You know, this idea that to get to the end goal can be so romanticized that you can, you know, just sacrifice everything to get there. But what happens when you actually get there? And, you know, it's actually something that I've talked about to some of my friends that are Olympians, right? What do you do? And it's not even the Olympians that win the gold medal. Most of the Olympians don't stand on, you know, gold, silver, or bronze, yet they still dedicate their lives to it just to get there. And then what do? And you have to ask yourself, was it worth it? And I don't have the answer. So you should be really like aware of what decisions you choose and how hard you go at it.
Yeah, there is a romance to giving your all to something. And, you know, what does that take out of, what does that really take? Because it doesn't just take it out of your life, right? It takes it out of the lives of the people around you too.
Absolutely.
Also, it's a very strong humble brag. Some of my friends who are Olympians. Speaking of sports, here's one from an anonymous attendee. Dave, do you still play golf? How's your game?
I don't play golf. I got a set of clubs last year because I finally relented to my friend who has been bugging me years. But that was the first time I had played a round of 18 holes since 2003. And I have not played since that one time. it brings me no joy. Golf
Yeah.
brings me no joy whatsoever. Mainly because I think that doesn't mean that there isn't a scenario where I could see myself consuming my life and playing it every day. And because I'm so competitive that I wouldn't even, it's not about enjoying the game of golf. It would be so I could beat the shit out of everybody, you know, and there's a total disconnect. If I, like when I played last year, that one time, I was like, my intensity to be good was that if like I had played like on the PGA Tour and I had to remind myself, Dave, you haven't played in like 13 years. You're going to suck. And that's the thing. I wish, you know, I contemplate that a lot with my son. Inevitably, I think he's going to know that the game of golf exists, and maybe he's going to want to learn how to play it. And I've thought about it. I'm like, shit, do I teach him how to play golf? And that's where I'm at right now. Is I only want to do things that bring happiness and not trauma to my life. And golf is just full of too much fucking trauma for me, and ultimately brings out the worst in me. In some ways, I feel that about the kitchen too. You know, whether Momo survives or not, hopefully it does. You know, I'm not a decision maker in the company anymore. Marguerite Mariscal, the CEO, is. We have a culinary team that takes care of the decisions. Can I have a role? But the same feeling I have for golf is sometimes how I feel about putting on whites in the kitchen. It brings out the worst in me. And I don't know if I'm really like wrestling with that a lot. I'm trying to find ways where I can add value and help people win and help us do well without having to put on whites. And obviously I can put on whites, but like put on whites is not just putting on the clothes. It is that like
that mentality, right?
Yeah, and it's not just me, man. You talk to a lot of my friends. I mean, not just my friends, but I'm sure you know people too. It's like when they put on the whites as a euphemism. It's a lot of people in our age bracket that worked in those early days. They don't like it. They don't like who they become, and I totally understand that. Yeah. So no, golf has that sort of same like, you know, I don't think I'll stop cooking, but I want to do something that if I would love. Well, let me put it this way: if I can learn how to play golf like I'm learning how to cook for my family now, then yeah, I'll play golf again.
Okay.
Because cooking for my family it's been a total joy. You know, I love doing it because it's like it is recalibrated how I think about food, and to the point where I look at composed plates and I'm like, I don't give a shit about that anymore. I really don't. I mean, I'm currently at a place now where just give me a bowl of chili.
Yeah.
That to me is way more beautiful than a composed plate with duck pressed rectangle and, you know, some beautiful whatever garnish and served in a fancy restaurant setting or non-fancy restaurant setting. I if I can find golf to have that same, like, if I can find golf like I can find something like a bowl of chili, then yeah, I'll play golf again. But
yeah, where it's about nurturing, right?
Yeah,
or, I mean, I think that's what you mean when you talk about how cooking your family brings you joy. It's about nurturing. It's about providing. It's about connection.
It's not about me.
Right.
You know, basically, again, anything that I do that's in service of me brings me total fucking misery.
I know you just talked about this, but there is a question from Jane. What brings you joy? So we know about cooking for your family. What else?
I love fly fishing. You know, some of my friends, like my wife, Grace, says, you really are good at all the rich white people sports, Dave.
Checking me out on the slopes, bro.
Yeah.
Okay, so, real talk.
Yeah.
Very Asian thing. Like I was not brought up. Well, I mean, rich white people sports. the proximity to whiteness and like feeling like I didn't grow up in a family that valued sports at all, like zero, like didn't care, was not brought up with it. But like my aunt and uncle, pictures all over the house of them hitting the slopes and playing tennis. And it was totally that thing. It's like, oh, like this is when we got here and we had like nothing and we like made something for ourselves. What did we want to be like? We wanted to be like the people who we looked around and like these were the avatars of successful people, right? And we're like
Yeah.
totally buying into that culture. Anyway, sorry, go on.
No, I am 100% on the same page with you, but it's funny too though. One reason why I really got into fly fishing too, because I lived in Wyoming in 1999, and I was the only Asian person that lived in Jackson Hole, for sure. And I've told this story a bunch because I used to live near the mailbox, and in the mailbox in the center of town, and there was always a ton of Asian tour buses there. They would always look at me being like, we left someone behind. As the bus was departing the town square, they're like, they're like going like, hey, and one of the things that I liked when I started to learn how to fly fish, where people would be like, what the fuck is this guy doing out here? I think that was ultimately the reason why I like to learn. I wanted to get really good at fly fishing, is because it was not the picture of Brad Pitt and the river runs through it. That I wanted to fuck that up for people, and I think I've done that quite a bit over the years. But I really, the only time I can get zen is when I'm fly fishing, and I'm now at a point where we talk about I like doing saltwater fly fishing quite a bit, because it's very intense, and if I am not present, it teaches me how to be present. So that's what I like about it. But ultimately, if you want the true meaningful answer to what brings me joy, and this is something that I have identified with my shrink over the years, and it makes me really fucking upset as to why I have to constantly be reminded to this. What brings me joy is bringing joy to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I always forget that. Always. Yeah. I love making other people successful. I love putting them in positions to be better. And whenever I put myself in a position that has to be service first, it always turns out poorly.
Yeah. What to say, Dave? I mean, like, as someone who read your book between 8 and 9 times, obviously it's your story. Obviously it's a story of your world as you recall it. But I think that this book is doing that for people. I think seeing you talk about your mental health obviously is a big subject that comes up, but even seeing you talk about how you relate and react to challenge and to feeling, not just challenge, but feeling defeated, how you relate and react to your workaholism, how you relate and react to all these things that from the outside look like, wow, this guy's really got figured out, this guy's doing great, I want to be like him. And then seeing all the ways where, it's not about you puncturing that, but about you recognizing like, oh, what are all the things that you have to sort of live through and give up to get to your version of whatever you think success is. I think it's really helping people think about their lives and think about themselves and think about what matters to them. So I know our time is we're a little bit over time now, so I think we have to call it a night. But I don't know, just as a reader, not even as your editor, I want to thank you for how this book performs that service for others. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Francis. Shout out to my friend Jim, who I didn't realize was going to actually be on this call. And to Beth, and to all you guys. There's 86 people. I am constantly floored and so grateful for any support. So thank you. And to Politics and Prose, we need to support independent bookstores more than ever. Thank you, Beth, and to everyone at this wonderful bookstore.
Thank you both so much. Gentlemen, this was an excellent conversation, really reflective of the topics and tone of the book, which absolutely is a great read. You can buy copies of Eat a Peach from Politics and Prose at the link in the chat. And again, your patronage is what is enabling us to bring you programming like this. We really we wouldn't be able to continue with it without those book purchases. So we thank every single person here for buying a book tonight. It means the world to us. It's really very personally felt. So thank you so much. Later this week, we're continuing our fall food programming with Chef Maddie Matheson's new cookbook, Homestyle Cookery. I am putting the link for that book in the chat too. And you can check out our broader events calendar at politics-prose.com/events. So thank you once more. I hope you stay well read, and cook with MSG. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Francis.
Thank you, everyone.